So part of my job is to keep my awareness of what it's like to learn new languages sharp, and one of the ways I do that is to rewatch movies that I know well, but dubbed into a language totally foreign to me. And for that reason, I recently revisited 2004's The Punisher. Obviously, if I call a film underrated or overrated, I'm going to get people who disagree with me. If I didn't, then by definition, I'd be wrong. So you might not agree with me, and that's okay. With this film, I can actually understand almost any response to it. But for what it's worth, not only do I think the 2004 incarnation of The Punisher is underrated, I think it's the best screen version of this character, full stop. Obviously there are going to be some spoilers, but it's 18 years old, so you can decide whether it's worth finding the movie before you watch the video, but you have been warned. So let's start with the story. This has got to be one of the simplest stories of any movie, even within the revenge subgenre, and I freaking love it. It's so honest. This film never tries to be anything that it's not. It actually did originally have this subplot of Frank's best buddy and fellow cop selling him out, and part of Frank's punishing was to track him down as well, and they cut it, and I'm glad they did. Themes like that were once intriguing. The idea that cops were crooked and could be corrupted with money, therefore making our heroes even less safe than normal, that was once dark and unsettling. But even in 2004, it was already cliched, so much so that I don't even need to know where Howard Saint came across his intel. I can just assume that everyone has a price and someone let the relevant information out. You see how knowing the details of how that happened actually just clouds the story. Do we become any more emotionally invested in this by knowing exactly who and why and everything? I don't think we do. What's cool is, as obvious as the story seems, it doesn't bore me, because on a macro scale it's simple, but on a micro scale it's quite busy. Every scene has contained within it some little story. There's something unexpected or some tiny mystery for us to work out every 5 or 10 minutes. There are dozens of examples of this, but even from within action scenes, you get subplots. For example, the Russian hitman. In this scene, all the preparation that Frank did fitting out his apartment with weapons is turned on its head. First, we think if he could just get a hold of the knife, but that doesn't work. Now, I know it's not realistic, but neither is the Russian as a character, and neither is this movie in general, but it works within itself. The Russian is so big that it kind of looks plausible that this knife wound wouldn't bother him, and it makes this scene so much more interesting. It has a story within it. Frank tries to stab him and that's no good, so can he get to the grenade that he hid in the bathroom? Yes, but that goes just as badly, but we did see him hide a gun somewhere. The question that's playing out in our heads while we watch this is, can he get to one of the many weapons he's hidden before the Russian beats him senseless? We also feel that at some point the neighbours who are cooking and listening to Rossini are going to notice the noise and be put in danger themselves, so it's a question of what's going to give. It looks like a fight scene, and it is, but it's also a mini movie. And when Frank finally does get to the gun, he's so defeated that he doesn't even have time to pull the trigger. See, nothing in this movie just happens exactly the way it's supposed to happen, except for the plot on a macro level. It's somewhat reversed to a lot of movies, which often have a lot of intrigue in the plot, but are predictable within each scene. And then as an addition to the little weapons trilogy of knife, grenade, gun, none of which worked, we finally get scalding hot soup, the one thing that Frank didn't prepare. Another aspect of this story that I like is that it's kind of a very low-key heist film. Frank's plan is actually quite intricate, and within the very simple framework that the plot does have, it's enough to keep us guessing. Why does he just keep parking the wife's car here and not doing anything? We think it might be something to do with a bomb or gaining Howard Saint's trust or something more traditional, but it's just about the parking tickets. That's really quite clever. The same with the blackmail calls. We think he's trying to frighten someone, but it's about the actual phone call itself. There are little moments like this constantly playing on our minds as this movie nears an otherwise obvious conclusion. Look, I get that this doesn't make it Shakespeare. I'm not saying that The Punisher is a masterpiece. My argument is just that it's very decent. Which brings me to the Punisher himself, Thomas Jane. Thomas Jane is freaking badass in this movie, and I wish he was in more stuff. There's even a moment where the director admits leaving the camera on Thomas for longer than was planned, just so we could get a good look at the fact that it's actually him and not a stunt double. I know that actors doing their own stunts isn't always great, at least for the people making the movie because it's a legal minefield, but in this movie, I'm glad that there are some moments that are 100% the man himself. Tom's build is also perfect for this role. It's not so bodybuilder that I get the impression that Frank only eats lean chicken breast and worships himself in the mirror, and it leaves room for some hired muscle to be of obviously superior strength to him, but he's totally big enough that I can buy him doing this. Thomas Jane also brings quite a lot to the role. He wears a look on his face that shows he's almost disappointed in humanity. He's over being alive, but not just because his family was killed, because there's nothing left to enjoy. With every aspect of Jane's performance, I feel that he's a genuinely good man who won't have any reason to live once this is done. I remember wondering for real if he was going to pull the trigger here. Now, I know a Marvel movie couldn't really end like that, but this is a pretty dark movie, and I dare say I wasn't the only one thinking, holy crap, really? I think this is a testament to just getting the basics right. The Punisher is not meant to be an emotional film, but because I like the character, I feel sorry for him, I like his friends and I want them to be okay, I actually find myself pretty invested here. See, you can't force emotion on your audience, and when you try to, you make a bad film. Instead, Jonathan Hensleigh just tried to make a good action film, and in doing so, he made a film that was just good overall. Back to Thomas Jane for a second, I think it's a shame that he doesn't get more big roles. In particular, he would have made an excellent Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight because he looks very similar to Aaron Eckhart, but he's more traditionally handsome, has a deeper voice, and I think he just would have pulled off Two-Face a little bit better than Eckhart did. Now for everyone else in this film. This movie is loaded with characters who are just that. Characters, not just faces wasting screen time. Again, it's hardly Jane Austen, but this movie makes me wonder about so many other movies that are just sort of okay or not even that. Is it really too much to ask that if a character has more than 3 minutes of screen time, we learn something about them and we feel the importance of that on the story? Because The Punisher does that. His neighbours, perfect for their roles in the story. Howard Saint's son, a spoiled brat who obviously does worship himself in the mirror and thinks that being rich entitles him to slaughter whoever he wants. Saint's right-hand man, who is at least loyal, but ultimately a sick bastard who deserves everything he gets. Now, there's definitely an argument that Saint himself, played by John Travolta, is kind of underwhelming, and while I agree, I think it's almost deliberate. It was never going to be challenging for the hero to kill Saint. He's a snivelling coward, and the movie isn't about this moment right here, it's about Frank getting to that moment, and as I mentioned, the choices he makes afterwards. It's particularly reminiscent of a certain film, an absolute masterpiece that I don't want to spoil, so I won't name it, and I think The Punisher works much better for this choice. It'd be silly if Frank easily disposed of like 40 of Saint's trained bodyguards, only to be challenged by Saint himself. The payoff instead comes in the form of then revealing to Saint that in every sense, Frank has defeated him. Call me sick, but I find this very satisfying to watch, and if you're an insurance executive, know that one day, someone's gonna do this to you. Then there's the look and feel. Often when you watch movies made prior to around 2008, they look kind of fake. Not because they are, but because practical lighting back then was much harder to do, so scenes were often lit from off-camera with studio lights that we accepted at the time, but looking back on it, it's not great. Not so with The Punisher, which is surprising because it was shot on film and was actually quite low budget, but it looks good. And on the low budget thing, the cuts and wounds in this movie were done on the cheap using practical tools and tricks that were more common in the 80s, and it looks so much better for it. Considering how much crazy crap goes on in this movie, it looks as legit as any action movie you'll see. There's really only one moment that looks a bit fake, and I think most of us can agree that that moment is stupid anyway, so it would be better without it, but maybe there wasn't enough reference to the source material for Marvel's liking, so sure, let's blow up a bunch of cars in the shape of a skull. And lastly, I just want to touch on the score. I don't know how it happened, but the hiring of Italian composer Carlo Ciliotto was either a stroke of luck or genius, because this film may look like a modern action film, but it's more like an Italian western. And thanks to Carlo and his score that is both fitting and at times quite beautiful, it feels like one too. I saw The Punisher in theaters before I'd seen anything by Leone, and back then I thought, yeah, okay, that was a pretty good movie, but having now since become a die-hard Leone fan and watching The Punisher multiple times since, I like it even more. I know it's not realistic, I know it's not highly intriguing, I know it's not even favourite film material, but it's what very, very few films are. Honest. It's just a revenge film, an action film, a western set in modern Florida, and a good time, and it knows it. 2004's The Punisher is a very underrated film. See you next time.